Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility channel. I'm your host, Michelle Orovitz, and today I am going to be bringing you a dose of hope. If you're on the fertility journey, I know that sometimes things can feel like you're really having to work extra hard to just hold on to some faith that something that hasn't yet happened will actually happen. And I know that this can be one of the hardest challenges on the fertility journey. So if you find that you're feeling this way and you need a dose of hope, stay tuned. So today I'm going to actually talk really right from the heart as a fertility acupuncturist and fertility coach. So I've had many different clients and patients that I'm working with in my clinic who are trying to conceive. And many of these patients and clients have been trying for sometimes over 5 years, sometimes over 2 years, and sometimes just 6 months, and are still feeling this same feeling of when is it going to happen. So I want to talk about many different things and some of the things that I've seen and noticed as a practitioner, some of the things that I've noticed as I was walking side by side with my patients and really going through the journey with them. I've had patients that have come to me for over a year and really felt the calling of their spirit baby, like really would get these incredible signs and would not know why they're getting these signs and nothing is happening. And eventually those same people did in fact get pregnant. And I'm happy to announce that sometimes I get these amazing pictures of their babies that are healthy. So even though I've been with them at those times that they felt it literally would be an impossible thing to happen. And some of these people have also gone to doctors and have been told that the only way they would work with them is if they got egg donor. Now, there's nothing wrong with egg donor, and many people actually do really well with finding an egg donor or an embryo donor. But those specific people just felt like that was not going to be their path. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on the esoteric levels and aspects of the fertility journey and how sometimes things can be invisible. What is working can be invisible. And then some of the things that we think is so real, like the labs and the numbers, and we put so much of our faith into, that can be a snapshot in time. And it can also not be the end all be all. So today I'm going to cover a lot of those aspects and really just give you a dose of hope, because I've seen so many cases where people were given diagnoses and also no hope by the practitioners and the team that they were working with. And now that is not to put down anybody on the team, and it's not to put down any doctors. This is just what they are trained to work with. And sometimes what we're trained to work with is really one aspect of reality, which is our labs. But that doesn't mean that everything should hang on those numbers. And let me explain why. I recently had a patient, which I'm just amazed by myself. And believe it or not, even though I've seen pretty amazing stories happen, and I've seen people defy the odds. And what I mean by that is defy what they've been told as really being their projection or their predictions of their future. Even though I've seen pretty miraculous and amazing stories, I still to this day get really surprised when I see some of the things that I see. And so my recent patient, and this is very recent, she was somebody who had a very high stress life. She had gone through a lot and she had a very demanding job. And sometimes that job would be overnights. And she so desperately wanted to have a baby. She really has been trying a year and a half. And she had gotten pregnant actually a year ago, and shortly after she miscarried. And so now she came after a year and was getting her period normally, and her hormone levels in a good range. FSH was at a good place, her TSH, her thyroid was normal, and then normal for fertility, and her AMH was normal. However, she had a couple of months before stopped getting her period and just never got it back. So she was freaking out because she wasn't understanding why all of a sudden she stopped getting her period. And of course, she wasn't pregnant. And she went to a doctor, and we had already started working together. And then afterwards, she went to a doctor, a new REI. Really nice guy. She's really still very happy with him. But what happened was when she got her labs showed that her FSH was through the roof and her AMH really plummeted. So she was really worried. And the doctor said, listen, the only thing that I'm thinking is that you're probably entering menopause. You're not getting your period. Your numbers are not really reflecting a fertile time. And then also, you'll probably do better with an egg donor. And he actually diagnosed her with premature ovarian failure. And what's crazy is he did another lab and then found that her HCG, which is the pregnancy hormone, was at a very low amount. And he said, well, this could be just an abnormal thing. Then she took a test at home and then saw that it was slightly positive. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know that I've seen many false positives. This doesn't really make sense that you wouldn't be pregnant based on this. Then she went again and her HCG really went up. And then she went again and it just keeps going really high. And at one point her progesterone was low, which would make sense if she's under a lot of high stress. So he put her on progesterone and it just kept going high to the point where the doctor said, you know what? I don't think that I'm going to be so quick to say premature ovarian failure, but maybe I'll say insufficiency. And it really gave him pause because at one point, I think he was just based on the numbers really dismissing that she could possibly get pregnant with her own eggs. But sure enough, she is pregnant right now and she never got her period. She must have just ovulated and during that time just went straight to pregnancy. And then I've had another patient who got off of birth control and she had not had her period for about 7 months. She was diagnosed with PCOS, and that could be kind of like a fake out that happens sometimes after going on the birth control pill. And then again, started coming to me, and then she ended up ovulating or noticing that she was ovulating, whereas before she was taking Clomid and nothing was helping. And she ended up going straight into pregnancy. And so many times I see people and this with such a range, such a different background, such a variety of different stories. And really the one thing that they have in common is, not really seeing the results and having to find some kind of belief. But the truth is, even though sometimes it feels like you're not believing, the fact that you're listening to this, the fact that my patients are coming to me or people are actually choosing to come to me, knowing that I'm helping with fertility, means that somewhere in their minds, they see a potential of themselves getting pregnant because otherwise they wouldn't do it. And that's something to always consider because sometimes you might say to yourself, I'm losing hope. But the fact that you're actually doing things and looking into things to try to conceive means that there's got to be some kind of hope in there. And there's got to be some kind of faith in your ability to conceive. Otherwise, you wouldn't really be putting any effort whatsoever. So there's got to be something inside of you that's telling you that there is potential for your conception and for you to have a baby. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today is really having faith in the unseen. And so many times we're really living in a world that we are so reactive to just the material world. And we put so much emphasis on the numbers, on the data and the information that sometimes this can cause us to ignore a huge aspect of reality, which is behind the scenes. It's the intelligence that runs the show. And I always talk about this intelligence that runs the show is evident in our cells. It's evident because when we have stem cells, which means that really it's like the form of cells that all cells begin at. And I remember having Bruce Lipton, and he was talking about how all cells begin as stem cells. But what changes them? What makes them differentiate if they all have the same blueprint of DNA? What's the difference? Why do some stem cells become liver cells? And why do some become fat cells and others become heart cells or skin cells? What's the difference? The environment. So Bruce Lipton is a cellular biologist, and he did studies where he would take different stem cells and put them in petri dishes and would create or alter the environments in which they grew. And those environments impacted how the cell would express itself. So all cells start with a blueprint of the DNA. So if the DNA was everything and nothing else mattered, then everything would end up being the same because they all have the same DNA. But there has to be something that's instructing those cells to develop the way they are. So what he's saying is that it's the environment. And what impacts this environment is our thoughts. So the biology of belief was his book, and he talked about how our thoughts can impact and inform our bodies to create hormones. So if it's stressful thoughts, it can cause cortisol to rise and stress hormones, and that can impact the cells. That could be your petri dish internally because that's your blood. And there are studies that were done on watching comedies, besides the fact that it helps with transfer rates, which is a huge deal, but it also helps with regulating your immune system. So we know that emotions and emotional states really impact our body. So these are things that are all behind the scenes. They work behind the scenes. And Dr. Lisa Miller, she does research on how our belief in something bigger than ourselves, or having some kind of spirituality in our life or spiritual practice, can impact our brains and protect our brains from depression. So we're seeing that belief in something that is much bigger can impact our emotions, and those emotions impact our physiology. And so just because we don't place a lot of importance in this in our everyday life doesn't mean it's not worthy of your attention. And it does not mean that this isn't something that you should be considering, especially if you're trying to conceive. And as a woman, we're channels. We are channels, and our bodies are channels to bring in new life. So having that channel, feeling aligned, feeling receptive, is incredibly important. And I see this aspect of our bodies and our minds and our spirits oftentimes so ignored, and so much more faith goes into the numbers and the analytics, which change. They change like the wind. I've seen them change. They change really based on lifestyle. And it's a snapshot in time. And from that snapshot, we can put so much importance into it. And so this is why I felt the need to talk about this, the need to talk about having faith in your body, having faith in something that is much bigger than us. And so going back to how our cells operate and those intelligence that tells and instructs what our cells become, how they end up expressing themselves. That is this divine intelligence that runs in your system. And there was a saying that many scientists go into science because they don't believe in a greater intelligence, because they think that everything's matter. And once they go back, it actually kind of brings them back to the creator. Once they start to study and see, even with the body, that there's so much more than meets the eye, that actually proves itself. So if you really, really want to look and you see how much intelligence runs the show, and how there's a mathematical equation to every living form, and you can see things like the Fibonacci sequence showing itself throughout nature, you can realize that things are not as random as we may think. And so this is kind of food for thought, to realize that having faith, not just in our process, not just in our lives, but really in something greater than us. Having faith in a creator will also infuse the faith we have in our own bodies. So personally, I do think it's very important to have some kind of spiritual practice. And that does not mean to be religious. It just means to really be in awe of our own creation, and that we have been born from something so much greater than ourselves. And I hesitated on talking about this because sometimes it can bring up so many different emotions because everybody has a different perspective. But if I share this as really something that I see oftentimes just with my own work. And also, it happens to be that when people connect with their spirit babies, and I had Tori Quisling on, she was the first guest in our new membership, the Wholesome Fertility Collective, which is a very, very affordable way to get coaching online every month. And she was our first guest. And she is also a spirit baby medium. She talked a lot about spirit babies. And she said that once you make that connection, it really opens the door. And I see this. I actually see it. And I see miraculous signs coming from my patients. And the signs come so clearly that it becomes almost more clear than if they're ever going to get pregnant. And even for me as a practitioner, even though I've seen so many success stories, I still question, like, when is it going to happen? You know, I get really excited and I get also emotionally attached to my patients' stories that sometimes I'm like, when is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? And I do pray for my patients. So one of my patients had these incredible signs for months and months and months, and she finally conceived, and it was random. It kind of fell out of nowhere because she was about to do her second retrieval. Her first retrieval failed. And it seems random, but it's not random. Everything happens for a reason. I've even seen incredible stories, and I've had them on my podcast where people would have their babies, and their babies would, and this happened 2 times, would be born on a certain date. And that date corresponded to the signs that they had before they even conceived, which is mind blowing. So those are the kind of things that happen, and it makes you think and pause, like, is there something else running the show? Is there something else behind the scenes? And is my belief in that something else, will that open the door for more miracles? Will that open the door to help me be a better channel? I personally believe the answer to that is yes. So my reason for doing this episode is really to share some of my stories, share some of my findings, and just to mention, even though I love the spirituality aspect, I also love bridging it with science, because now we are starting to see things and measure things that we originally did not have access to. And I think that that also almost sheds light on the fact that there really is something behind the scenes, and we can start to see this through research and evidence. And we can see that visualization makes a difference, that belief makes a difference, and that emotional states make a difference. And getting into states of joy and watching comedies, it releases a lot of the tension that we can build up in our bodies. And Chinese medicine talks about that tension. It talks about how constricting ourselves really constricts that life force vitality, this incredible intelligence in our body, which is referred to as chi or prana, depending on the background. One is from India and one is from China, but they talk about the same thing. And that life force vitality, it wants to flow, it wants to move, but we get stuck in a certain state of mind. But believe it or not, even though it doesn't feel this way, our state of mind is malleable. It is something that we actually have control over. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like it controls us. But there are tools and ways that you can get back your control. And I do often teach this to both my clients online and my patients in person. And if you're ever curious or want to find out more, you can always book a call with my team on my website. And many of my other podcast episodes are really about getting that power and that empowerment back into your life. So I really do hope that this episode triggered some sense of hope in you, because I will tell you, just based on my experience, there is so much more than meets the eye. And even with Chinese medicine, we do learn that the spirit is connected to the body and that the spirit of a person matters. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you benefited from this episode, and I will see you next time.